It started with her wanting a divorce. 3 years into our marriage, my wife sat me down one evening and said she wasn't happy. "I just need space to figure things out," she said, her voice dripping with forced sincerity. "This isn't about you. It's about me." Classic line. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply nodded, letting her believe I was too stunned to respond. That's the thing about me. I don't show my cards until the game is over. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into her so-called self-discovery. Late nights with friends, weekend yoga retreats, and countless hours scrolling on her phone. I'd catch her smiling at notifications, tilting the screen away whenever I walked by. I didn't push. I just observed. I noticed how little time she had for me. No more dinners together. No lingering conversations about the future. She had one foot out the door, practically daring me to react. But I didn't. Instead, I started making plans of my own. Then, about a month later, she came crawling back. "I made a mistake," she whispered one night, tears streaming down her face. "I love you. I don't want to lose us." She didn't elaborate on what had changed her mind, and I didn't ask. I simply put on my best understanding husband face and told her we could work through it. She hugged me tightly, thanking me for being so forgiving. Forgiving? Hardly. That was the moment I decided to ruin her. The night she begged to come back, I held her close and told her everything would be fine. I kissed her forehead, let her sob into my chest, and reassured her that we'd rebuild what was broken. Meanwhile, I started tearing it all apart. Step one was securing my finances. For months, I had been quietly moving money from our shared account into one she didn't know existed. By the time she returned, I had a healthy safety net sitting untouched. When I told her I'd handle the bills to ease her stress, she looked so grateful. If only she knew. Next, I turned my attention to my health. While she had been out, finding herself, I'd been in the gym 5 days a week. Each rep, each sprint on the treadmill, felt like a step closer to my freedom. I wasn't just working on my body. I was sharpening my mind. I took up hobbies I'd abandoned long ago, painting, running, even cooking. I wanted a version of me who walked away from this marriage to be someone she'd regret losing for the rest of her life. But the real groundwork started with the lease. The apartment was in my name. Thankfully, she didn't have the credit score to co-sign when we first moved in. I reached out to the landlord under the guise of exploring my options. After a few emails and some small talk during a visit to the office, I had a plan in place. I negotiated an early termination with a move-out date set for mid-December. Imagine her surprise when she comes back from vacation at her parents' house and finds me gone, her things in the trash, new locks on the door, and nowhere to live. As for her car, well, it was never really hers to begin with. She loved to brag about her SUV to her friends, but it was my name on the title, my credit that got her the loan. I contacted the dealership and started exploring my options. After some research, I found a buyer in another state who'd happily take it off my hands once the paperwork cleared. By the time her trip rolled around, that car would be on a tow truck headed halfway across the country. She'd be left with no wheels, no home, and no explanation. While all this was happening, I played my role as the doting husband to perfection. I listened to her stories about work, nodded along to her plans for the holidays. Plans I knew I'd never follow through on. She had no idea the man she was falling back on was meticulously plotting her ruin. Then there was the wild card. Her mom. Her mother had always struck me as opportunistic and flirtatious. I'd noticed her habit of liking photos of shirtless younger men on Instagram long before this mess began. She even joked about how she still had it. So I created Ryan, a 29-year-old personal trainer with abs you could grate cheese on, a few strategically placed photos, a bio oozing confidence, and within days, I had her hooked. It didn't take long for her to bite. A few compliments from Ryan about how youthful and beautiful she looked, and she was sending flirty messages. Soon, The conversations escalated. I saved every screenshot. This wasn't really about her mom, though. It was about her father. The man who once looked me in the eye and said, "The women in this family are too loyal for nonsense like cheating." He would soon be eating his words. Piece by piece, everything was falling into place. She thought she was rebuilding our marriage. I was building her reckoning. By December, everything was set. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. She had planned to spend a week visiting her parents for the holidays, and that was the final piece I needed to pull the trigger on everything I'd been working toward. The first step was the apartment. The day after she left, I met with the landlord. By that evening, the locks had been changed and I handed over the keys. Anything I cared about had already been moved to a storage unit weeks prior. Her clothes, makeup, and endless piles of shoes, neatly packed into garbage bags and dropped off at a donation center. But I didn't stop there. The car was next. Arrangements had already been made for it to be towed while she was still on her way to her parents' place. The process was almost laughably simple, just a signature and a confirmation call. The car was en route to its new owner across state lines before she even unpacked her bags. By the time she returned, all that would be left was an empty parking spot. The piece de resistance, though, was what I left behind for her parents. Her father had always been vocal about their family's supposed values. Women in their family, he claimed, were loyal to a fault, incapable of the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. That little delusion was about to shatter. On the day she arrived at her parents' house, I scheduled an email to her father. Attached were screenshots of every message her mother had exchanged with Ryan, every flirty reply, every desperate attempt to feel young and desired again. I made sure to include a note from Ryan apologizing for cutting things off, explaining that he just couldn't be with a married woman anymore. It wasn't just about exposing her mom's infidelity. It was the irony of it all. Her father, who once defended his daughter's character to me, insisting she wasn't capable of cheating, would now see that not only was his daughter disloyal, but so was his wife. I didn't stick around to see the fallout. By the time her vacation was over, I was long gone. The apartment was empty. The car was sold, and I blocked her on every form of communication. She called me repeatedly from her parents' house, panicking when she couldn't reach me, but I ignored every call. Later, she tried everything, calls, emails, even showing up at my workplace, but I'd severed every connection. All that remained was a wreckage she'd have to sift through alone. When she returned to the city, she found nothing waiting for her. No home, no car, no husband. Just an empty life and a hard lesson in consequences. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had tried to explain herself to everyone we knew. Her story, that I'd overreacted and left her over a moment of temporary weakness. Funny how she didn't mention that her weakness involved another man or her plans to leave me. Her reputation was in tatters. Her father, humiliated by the revelations about his wife, had stopped speaking to her altogether. Her parents' marriage was reportedly on the rocks, and she had to move in with a friend because she couldn't afford her own place. As for me, I was thriving. The money I'd saved gave me a fresh start. I moved into a new apartment, focused on my career, and even started dating again. Revenge wasn't just sweet. It was calculated, precise, and deeply satisfying. Some say it's petty to hold a grudge. I disagree. Some betrayals deserve a response, one that cuts as deeply as the initial wound. Revenge, after all, must be carefully planned and served cold.